Hi again, Ian here from the Red and Blue Review. Welcome to the first in the new series, Zero to Hero, where we interview ex-players about their careers, the good times, the bad times, and of course, their time with Palace. Today, I'm extremely pleased to say that we've got Peter Ramage here to do just that. Hi, Peter. How's it going?
Morning. Yeah, good morning. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, bearing up, but clearly I'm at the other end of the day than you are because obviously you're in the States. You're 8 hours behind. So I'm
8 hours behind.
really grateful for you actually taking the time to spend with us.
Not a
So, as I say, this is about you as a footballer and your career. So, what better place to start than at the start? And when I was actually looking at some background information for this interview, I actually did you realise there's another Peter Ramage, footballer?
I didn't. I knew of a Craig Ramage that
Well,
he hit the
obviously.
headlines recently for a remark. But he was the only Ramage that I knew of. Obviously, played at Derby County back in maybe the 80s and 90s. If memory
Yeah, well,
serves me right, maybe played for Watford.
I had a bit of a fright because it said died in, and I thought, oh my, you know, the interview's over before it started. But apparently,
Yeah,
he was born in 1908, and so he did have quite a long and distinguished career. So, but clearly not as
oh
good as
wow.
yours.
Oh well. Hey,
So,
that's interesting.
yeah, I was just about to say that's the starter for 10 for you next time round. So part of the reading I did, I was interested to know that your dad was an international rugby referee.
Rugby
Is that right?
union. Yeah, he was. It's funny, yeah, because I've literally just this morning. It says everywhere that I kind of grew up in Whitley Bay. I was born in Assheton, which is only partly true. I was born in Assheton, but I didn't grow up in Whitley Bay. I grew up in a little town just north of Newcastle called Berwick upon Tweed. It's just south of the Scottish border, and I've just done a call with the boys club there at Berwick Rangers because it's a boys club that I first started it, and my dad was he was an international rugby referee out of Berwick, and that was his kind of affiliated club, and we lived there up until '96 when I was 12-year-old, and I moved down to Newcastle, and he was a big influence on my early stages. He was my boys club manager along with one of my good friends, his dad. So he gave me my start in football, even though he was a rugby man himself. But he always encouraged me just to play whatever I wanted to play. I played rugby when I was younger, but trying to defend.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to go on.
Was,
That's what I was going to go on to ask. Actually, it was by having your dad so involved in sport anyway. That must have been a heavy influence on yourself, and obviously he was. But I'm
yeah,
interested to note that he didn't actually push you to rugby. Do you ever
no, he
get to the bottom
didn't.
of why that was, or?
Because I was better at football than I was at rugby. He himself was a really, really good scrum half. He was on the brink of, back then in the 80s, it was semi-professional, it wasn't professional like it is now. But he was on the brink of the Scotland national squads. He played for it's the Falcons now, Newcastle Falcons now, but it was Gosforth back in the day when they were, a big powerhouse of rugby union back in the 80s. But unfortunately, he suffered a kind of a career-ending injury when he was 26, 27. He somewhat broke his neck, and it curtailed his career. He was a scrum half. As he's come out of the scrum, he's collided with one of the flankers, and tragically the guy who he collided with, ended up being paralyzed. My dad was lucky, and he was able to kind of walk away from the situation.
Wow.
So he was a really good rugby player, and from then he kind of took up on. I think he was encouraged to go into refereeing. He's a rugby man. Rugby's his sport before football. But he never forced me into rugby. I enjoy playing rugby, and I've spoke about it in the past that sometimes I prefer watching rugby union games than watching football games. I followed him around. When he was on the international scene, I went to his international games. With my uncle and my granddad. Loved watching him when he was up in the Scottish borders refereeing in Scotland. In particularly, I loved going to. He's a big fan of the sevens competitions, you know, in the summer when everybody just congregates and it's a 7-a-side tournament. And, you know, we used to go and do international sevens, and, you know, he'd done Tri-Nations games, he'd done World Cup games, he'd done five nations when it was back then, you know, turning into the Six Nations. And he was a big influence on me just to see and be around, you know, professional athletes. Okay, it was the rugby stars, but he was he allowed me to see what it was like to become a professional athlete. And I mean, them guys walking into dressing rooms with my dad and seeing, you know, Martin Johnson, Justin Leonard at 6'7", 6'8", and I thought I'd far rather try and mark them in the corners than getting hit by them, you know, in a car crash kind of tackle. So he was great, and you know, throughout my playing career and now into my coaching career, he's always the first person I pick the phone up to seek advice, because, you know, he's seen a lot of things in his lifetime. Just being a referee.
Oh, that's good. That's so good to hear. So you say that you moved at an early age to Newcastle, the area around Newcastle. Did you actually follow Newcastle as a kid, or who was your team?
Newcastle was my team. As soon as I was, my auntie's she lived in Berwick. All the family lived in Berwick, but she had season tickets and has so for God, I mean, it might be nearly 40 years. It was as long as I've been alive, and they had 4 season tickets at Newcastle. And as soon as I was born, it was, you know, the Newcastle shirt thrown on me back. In fact, although me nana, for like my dad's mum, me nana, for some reason, my first jersey I ever got was an Everton jersey. It was the NEC one. I don't know why me nana got it, but that was my first kind of official jersey. And then
it was probably like most nanas, when it's just a nice colour blue.
Correct. And then the next summer, she buys me a Tottenham jersey. I'm like, no, I'm a Newcastle fan. You know, where's my Newcastle jersey? But I was born into the Geordies. I used to support them. I went to all the games, and then obviously when I joined at 11-year-old in the academy, well, it was a centre of excellence back then. We got tickets to go to the games, and I was a Newcastle fan then, and still am.
So talk us through that then, because obviously the people that will be watching this probably don't know, or haven't had any idea as to what that must feel like, as to how you got into the actual academy in the first place, and then to get from the academy to sign your first professional contract. How did that work, and how did that feel?
Well, it was strange, because Berwick is a small town in the middle of nowhere, really. There's no, like, we're an hour from Edinburgh, Scotland, which is, you know, the Hearts and Hibs. You're an hour from Newcastle, so it was very hard back in them days to get spotted. You know, I was on with a lad who I grew up with, who was at Newcastle as well, and we were both talking about it was just by sheer luck, if I'm brutally honest with you. The schools, there was 2 schools in Berwick, whereas Newcastle is probably 50 or 100 schools. You know, there's loads. So scouts tend to go in and around the Newcastle area to pick up players, and it was just by luck. I'd went to the Berwick Middle School that I was at, went to a competition. We done really well. Then I was part of, obviously, the boys club on a Sunday, and we played a game down in Newcastle, and the scout watched me the Saturday, then watched me the Sunday. I had 2 good games, and then gets a phone call to come down for a 6-week trial, and that was it. I was in. I got my 6-week trial and ended up signing, and, you know, progressed from what was then, it was under 12s through the age groups, through the academy and the reserves, and then into the first team, which, you know, it was kind of a 10-year path almost from when I went in to making my debut. But it was, you know, a journey that, you know, it set me up and gave me the life skills to try and be successful.
So can you remember the day that you were sat down in the office and signed your first professional contract? How did you get to know that you were going to be signed up in the first place? Did you have an agent or anything like that?
No, my dad negotiated everything for me. He sought advice. One of our family friends is kind of a sports lawyer. So my dad just went in and said, "What, you know?" I mean, I wasn't getting, you know, hundreds of thousands a week. I wasn't even getting thousands a week. I was getting a couple hundred quid. But at a young age, I was always playing above my age group. You know, I was it was under 17s and 19s back then. When I was 14 and 15-year-old, I was in the under 17s and a regular in the team. So Alan Irvine, who's now the assistant manager to David Moyes at West Ham, he was our academy director and still to this day probably one of the best educators I've ever come across in all walks of life. He offered me, back then it was a kind of 2-year YTS scholarship, but I was offered 2 years and then a 1-year pro, which was kind of unheard of. The odd player got it here and there. But then when it came to the end of my second year, which going into my first year pro, I was offered a 3-year professional deal, and my dad just went in and negotiated it, and then
signed it for you.
Signed it for me. Yeah, I mean, he probably said I was on X amount and I was actually getting Y. He was taking a couple of quid himself, but even going into into more moves to QPR and Palace and things like that, my dad was always involved in the negotiations because and to be brutally honest with you, I mean, football is a cutthroat industry. He's the only person in life that I would trust to see the best for me.
So, but through you saying that, you've never had an agent then?
Yeah, I have. Oh. But I signed with an agent, and then I went with a big agency when I signed my first professional deal at Newcastle, and I stayed with the same guy throughout my career. But I made it known from the start that any conversations that were to be had, between my agent and the club had to go back to my dad before they came to me, just so he could kind of scour over the finer details. My dad's a project manager, so he deals with contracts on a daily basis, so he knows what to look for, and he reads the fine print. I don't think many other people do. I certainly don't read fine prints on a lot of things, but he does. So, I had an agent who's incredible for me throughout my career, and but he was really, really respecttive of the fact that my dad was to be involved in everything, and that was just purely because, like we talked about just before, he's involved in the sports, and he knows a lot more than most sort of fathers do.
Fantastic. Well, it's clearly an influence, and that's obviously evident throughout your career as well. So you made your first team debut as a substitute in the UEFA Cup.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, you made your first start at Old Trafford.
Yeah.
Talk us through what was going through your head at that stage, and how long before the game you've been given notice, and what it must have been like trying to keep the nerves and the excitement down.
Well, I mean, the Olympiacos game, it was a quarterfinals, and we'd gone to Olympiacos in the first leg and won 3-1 away from home, which was an unbelievable result. I mean, it was the Olympiacos that had Rivaldo at the time, amongst other great players, and came to St James's Park, and Graham Souness was the manager, who was a massive influence on me coming through. I mean, his time at Newcastle didn't go particularly well, but for me personally, he was brilliant with me. And he kind of said before the game, if we get a couple of goals up, he was going to rest some of the first team stars. We scored 2 goals in the first half. It was 5-1 up at half time, and he told me and a couple of the other young lads that were on the bench that there could be a possibility, to be ready. And 20 minutes into the second half, turned around and it was my time. I went on, and it was 10 years of blood, sweat and tears to make the dream come true of walking onto St James's Park in front of all my friends and family.
And that first touch you must have been dreading it.
Yeah, I think, well, what was great, there was a lot of, it wasn't as if I'd just been thrown in into the deep end of first team. I'd trained, and we were trained with the first team for 3-4 years. There was a many opportunity where I had the chance to go on loan to get some experience, but the club never allowed me because I was training regularly. I was involved in the squads, and whilst it was frustrating for me that there was other players, Stephen Taylor, Michael Chopra, to name a couple, were going out on loan and getting that first team experience.
And those two in particular, you actually came through the system with as well, didn't you?
Correct. Grew up with Chops. Chops was one of the first people I met when I came in at 11-year-old, and I went to middle school with Tails. Although Tails is the same age as my sister, a couple of years younger than me. We'd grown up together. Me and Tails were centre-half partnership throughout the academy. So these were 2 lads. Tails went to Wickham for a loan period. Chops had periods on loan at Watford, Barnsley, Nottingham Forest. But I was stuck in the reserves, and it was frustrating for me. But I was getting to train day in, day out with the likes of Alan Shearer's, Craig Bellamy's, Jonathan Woodgate's, Kieran Dyer's, international stars who, you know, were giving me an education. So to then go on and onto the pitch, I had familiarization with these guys, and they looked after me. You know, I think I came on, and about 2 minutes later, you know, I got a throw in down the right. I've taken a throw in, and it's ended up, you know, Alan Shearer scored. So it was just brilliant to you know, fulfill a dream of you know, being a Geordie, sitting on the stands, watching these guys play day in, day out, or week in, week out, sorry, and seeing them train day in, day out, and then to, you know, become a first team player was, you know, like I said, it was something that I'd aspired to be.
And it must have been something your family would have been incredibly proud of seeing you do that as well.
Yeah, they were all at the games, and they all, you know, again, my auntie was, you know, she was in the East Stand with her 4 season tickets with my 2
What about
cousins.
your nana? Was she sitting there in her Everton shirt?
Unfortunately, you know, my grandparents by then, my nana had passed by then, but my granddad, my 2 granddads were, and my other grand, they were watching. My granddads would come to the game. My granny, she would, bless her, she would come to a couple, but she was, you know, in the latter stage of her life, so she was watching at home. She was, you know, my grandpas were always on the phone after the games, and they were, you know, they weren't short in telling me whether it was good, bad, or, you know, indifferent. They were probably my biggest critics, but also my biggest fans. And it was a proud moment for the whole family. They'd been with me throughout my time. You know, when I was at Berwick and I first got on trial, my dad worked in Newcastle, so my granddad used to pick me up from school and drive me down. And it's an hour and 15 minutes from Berwick to Newcastle. So, you know, he's picking me up at 3:30 from the school gates to get me down for, you know, a 5 o'clock training at Newcastle, which, you know, I couldn't have, and I wouldn't have got to where I am without, you know, the support network that I had behind me. And, you know, even now, you know, my wife and kids, you know, they're here in Phoenix, Arizona. They're following me and my profession. So that's been a huge plus throughout my career, that, you know, I've had that family network to support me.
It's interesting you say that. We'll come on to that later. But yeah, it must be a bit of it's quite a bit of a nomadic career for quite a few pros. But having made your debut and then broken into the team, you then went on and became a bit of a regular in the 2005-06 season, having 29 appearances. But then in the following season, I think you only had about 2 appearances, largely due to injury. Now, how hard is that to deal with? And how hard is it not to overtrain on the road to recovery, only to then set you back? Because we see that with a number of players. Connor Wickham's one that springs to mind. You know, apologies if I'm singling him out, but there seem to be players that are so eager to get on with it that they tend to overtrain and then break down again.
Yeah, I mean, that was a real dark time in my career, because I was in the last year of my contract. Sam Allardyce had just come in. You know, we're buying players because that's what Newcastle did. They were a top Premier League team at the time. So to sustain such a long-term injury, you know, I tore my ACL and was basically told that was my season done, and we were 4 games into the season. And it's like, well, you know, 34 games that I'm going to miss out on, and I was doing all right, and I played the first couple of games, and then to sustain this injury was really tough. And, you know, in the January, Sam Allardyce left, and Kevin Keegan took over the reins as the new manager, who I idolised as a kid, watching his entertainers team, you know, almost win the Premier League and be such a dominant force in English football at times. So he was a hero of mine. And then for him to come back and be manager, you just want to be part of that team. So you're right. You know, sometimes you have to force yourself to, you know, I want to get back. I want to be back quicker. I want to play for Kevin Keegan. I want to play for Newcastle. But I was so privileged to have such an unbelievable medical department at Newcastle. You know, Derek Wright was the head of the physio department, who's still there now to this day. And he's, you know, one of the best physios I've ever come across. And a coach at the time, Chris Hughton, who obviously went on to manage a few clubs in the Premier League. He was a first team coach. Yeah, I wasn't going to mention it, but Chris was probably I owe a lot to him for my time coming back, because he would take me into the gym and he would have specific, you know, positional specific program for me and from the football side of things, but he'd also hold the reins on me, and because he'd you know, been an international star for the Republic of Ireland, played for Spurs for such a number of years. So he knew what I was going through as well, and gone through injuries. So it was, you know, I talk about the support network from a family standpoint. I was privileged to have the support network of the coaching staff too, who, you know, yes, they knew that I wanted to get back because I was in the last year of my contract and itching to play. They also knew that, you know, I was 23 at the time and I had another however long, not to rush it back. And like you said, maybe pick up another injury that was going to affect me going down the line. So it was brilliant. And, you know, Kevin Keegan was unbelievable with me. And even up until the day I signed for QPR, he offered me another year for the year that I'd just obviously previously missed, and said the contract would only be torn up once I signed for somewhere else. And, you know, whilst he advocated for me to go and, you know, play football, that it wasn't going to be a regular under him and the following year, I still had that security there. So again, it was something that, you know, it stayed with me, and I've seen him on the circuit. Like you said before, football's a small world, and he always remembers that. He always remembers that, and you know, I'm grateful and privileged to have, you know, a world-renowned football star like that have that kind of.
And also, I guess it's nice to have a manager with that level of honesty, in that you're not likely to get much of a look in, because one player's misfortune is another player's fortune. And
correct.
The amount, I mean, look at Aaron Wan-Bissaka, you know, when obviously he then got in and played right back, and then, you know, now look at him now. So I guess it swings and roundabouts. So
correct.
You mentioned that because you weren't going to get a look at there's going to be a lack of games for you, that you then went on to QPR. Now, I know that we've spoken to you in the past when you were doing the quiz questions. There was a telling line and said, and at QPR, wasn't that a great time? Now, I mean, firstly, was it hard to leave Newcastle?
Yeah, it really was, because and I reference this a lot when I talk about my time moving. Jermaine Jenas was ridiculed for a quote that when he left Newcastle for Tottenham, that he said Newcastle was like a goldfish bowl compared to other cities, and he was lambasted for it, but he was 100% right, and it really is. The whole city is centered around the football club. Everybody's Monday to Friday is geared around getting the money to go for a pint before the game, watch the game, and then go for a pint afterwards. Everything's surrounded by it or centered around it. So to move to London was a huge culture shock. You know, if it wasn't for Big Damo Delaney, then I don't know if I would have survived it. Although he did try to, you know, ruin me on a few times, taking me out and showing me the bright lights of London. But you know, my mum and dad, again, they were an influence on me trying to settle down there, because I was forever going up the roads. I was driving 5.5 hours after a game at QPR just to spend Sunday, and then, you know, leaving at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to drive back down to try and get the train, or I was getting the first flight. And it was just because I was homesick. I'd never been outside of Newcastle, but, you know, my mum and dad banned me from coming back up. Damo grabbed a hold of us, and we became really close, and along with a couple of other guys. Is that
where that relationship started, then?
Yeah, it was. Damo was a huge influence on me as a friend, as well as a player. You know, he was the left back, I was the right back, so we kind of had that positional kind of relationship going. But then we had the friendship off the field. You know, Gavin Mann, who obviously played for Palace, had a brief spell at Palace. You know, Martin Rowlands, the centre midfield player, Lee Cook. We kind of had a little group of people or a group of players who, you know, similar to the group that I had at Palace in the 2012-13, we were just really close, and them guys really helped me settle into London life, and yeah, they allowed me to enjoy the city.
So when you move to a new club, I mean, you don't know what the dressing room's like. I guess that soon after joining, you know whether it's going to be a good dressing room or whether it's going to be a clicky one. But what sort of things do players look for in their new clubs when they're going to sign?
Just that, you know, what's the dressing room like? You know, have you got some bad eggs that are going to make a toxic environment that's going to, you know, filter onto the field, or have you got a good group? And that was one of the reasons why I joined QPR. I had a couple of other interests from clubs, but I spoke to Martin Rowlands. We had the same agent. So when I came down to London to check QPR out, I went for a bite to eat and a pint with Martin, and I just got a great sense of what I was going into, the environment that I was going into. You know, Rolly was he was a huge, and still is obviously a huge family orientated guy. You know, working class background, and he told me that was the kind of the background that we had at QPR. You know, there was players there that I'd come across. You know, Gavin Mon, I knew of him. Damien Delaney. There was players in that locker or dressing room. I call it locker room. This dressing room that was that I'd come across again, I played against, and you know what kind of people they are, and it was a big selling point that I was going into an environment that was going to make me feel comfortable and allow me to kind of readjust to being in the big bad smoke.
Well, I mean, you settled in really quickly. Didn't you score on your debut against Blackpool?
No, it was the year after.
It was the year after?
It was the year after the first home game against Blackpool. Yeah, no, I went a whole year without, and that was actually my first professional goal as well. I never scored.
Yeah, I got that bit right then.
The season before was we had an up and down season, to say the least. You know, we went through, I think, about 4 or 5 managers or something daft like that, and then the year after was it was the first home game of the season against Blackpool. I'd gone to put a ball in the box from a wide area, and you know I'd seen the keeper. I'm liking to say I've seen the keeper off his line, so I've dinked him.
And you were 35 yards out.
Of course, obviously, you know it was
on your wrong foot.
On my wrong foot, you know, I scored with my head. Anything and everything that could make it sound like a world.
You yourself on the wing, and then
exactly. But again, it was a proud moment for me. I always wanted to score, so scoring at Loftus Road was a fantastic feeling.
It is one of the good grounds. I mean, one of the questions I had intended. I'm going to ask it now anyway. As a result of this, it almost, I think it actually does QPR a disservice, because it is so enclosed and so raucous. When Palace go there, they'll fill out that end, and then we'll make more noise than anyone else. You know, and I'm sure it'll be the same with Newcastle there and everything else. And I think it probably intimidates the team just as much as their side supports it. So, but talking about grounds, what is the best ground, your favourite ground to play at for you?
The favourite one I enjoy playing at was at Goodison. I mean, I'm a football traditionalist.
Is that because you had the top?
Yeah, probably because I had the top. Yeah, it's
felt
but no, it's funny because and it was something that somebody asked me about the clubs that I played for. They're all traditional English clubs that kind of stayed true to their traditions. I mean, there was only really Coventry that, you know, obviously they were at the Rico, but you know, the clubs that I've been at were all clubs where there was a bit of history to them, to the ground as well as the actual football club. Yeah. You know, Newcastle St James's, QPR Loftus Road, Palace Selhurst, you know, Birmingham St Andrews, Barnsley, Oakwell. They're all clubs, even Leyton Orient at Brisbane Road. They're all clubs that, you know, that the grounds have been there from year dot, and
the communities have been built round the grounds.
Correct. So when I go to like I said, Goodison Park, it was coming out to the, you know, them chimes at Goodison. I just loved it. I loved playing at Goodison. Anfield was another ground that, you know, I loved playing at. And they were just proper football grounds where, you know, you said the noise was true. It was a true football and cauldron where, you know, you were intimidated playing there, but thrived under that kind of pressure. And yeah, it was a ground that, you know, I always enjoyed going to. Never had much success there, but I always enjoyed playing there.
Just that's probably because you were enjoying the surroundings.
Yeah, just standing there,
exactly. So time rolls on from QPR. No matter how good a time you're having there, things obviously naturally come to an end, and you actually join us for a brief spell, then go to Birmingham, and then sign for us permanently. Now, what was going on there? What happened? Why didn't your initial loan carry on, or was that part of the agreement and we said, no, come back, or what?
Yeah, it was the first year that QPR were in the Premier League. The season before, similar to my situation at Newcastle, I tore my cruciate in my third year at QPR, which was the final year. No, I done my left knee. So I done my right knee at Newcastle and my left knee at QPR. So again, and it was the fourth game of the season, and both knees were done against Middlesbrough. So I had like, it was such a ironic moment in my playing career that, this had happened. Lightning had struck twice. And that was the year that, I missed out on the promotion. QPR got promoted, and I only played like 5 or 6 games, if that. I don't even think I might even made that amount of appearances. And that was probably the toughest moment of my career, that QPR were doing so well, and I was missing everything. I was on the treatment table. So when it came to the year and they got promoted, Neil Warnock was a manager, and the year after he was again upfront and honest, like Kevin Keegan was. Said that he was going to be bringing players in, that I wasn't going to be a regular. By this time, there was now obviously the rule of the 25, man squad list, and that he was thinking about putting me in there, but probably wasn't going to play. And off the back of not playing the year before, I should go and get football. But conversation was all said in the space of 5 minutes, because he was like, and I've agreed for you to go to Palace. Get yourself in the car. You're going down to meet Dougie Freedman. I was like, cool, cheers. So I was in Sunningdale, had to whip around the M25 to the Croydon Park Hotel, and I met Dougie, and I initially agreed to go there for six months. It was up until January the 7th. By that time, Neil Warnock had, come and close that day, and Neil Warnock had come and gone. Mark Hughes was now the manager at QPR, and I was speaking to Dougie, and we both wanted me. I wanted to stay. Dougie wanted to keep me. But Mark Hughes obviously had other ideas, and he said, "No, you're coming back. I want to see what you." I'd done okay. We were doing all right at that time, and I'd been playing regularly. And he said he wanted to see me over the course of January, which was really frustrating, because I kind of knew that I wasn't going to be part of it. QPR were in the process of signing Nedum Manua, who was, a big signing from Man City, and which was another player for me to come and get past. So I begged basically Mark Hughes to allow me to go back to Palace, and Dougie just couldn't. He waited. He'd signed Paul McShane, I think in the first week in January, with the thought that I wasn't going to go back. So, that door got closed for me to go back, which I was really annoyed about, because I loved, even in that 6 months, I loved playing for Palace. Again, another great locker room, or dressing room, sorry. There was some really good players in that dressing room who made me feel so welcome. And I wanted to stay, but it just didn't happen. And, Dougie was brilliant. He gave me every opportunity, but he needed cover in that spot, and Paul McShane was brought in, and my time was kind of closed on that.
Yeah, no, it was. But then you turned up, didn't you?
Yeah, and then, well, that was the thing. So I kept in touch with Dougie. I went to Birmingham for the second part of that season. Chris Hughton was a manager at Birmingham, who I referenced before, and because of what Chris had done for me at my time at Newcastle, that was a no-brainer for me to go up there. And actually, I think one of my first games for Birmingham was against Palace up at St Andrews, which I think we were 3-0 up at half time, and I was marking Muzza and giving Muzza a load of stick. Mealy was playing, Paddy was playing. We had I think Darren Amber was on the wing, and I was marking Wilf. I think I was right back and marking Wilf.
So how does the conversation go when you're in the opposition change room and they're asking you about Wilf, and you're going, "Yeah, he's all right. It's not bad. It's okay." It's that way you're marking him. Okay. Who's
the danger man?
Yeah,
David right in the middle of the park, but right, yeah. It was. Right, you won't mind me saying that. I've got a great relationship with him, but it was. Chris leaned upon me for a lot of information, because obviously I'd been there the first half of the season.
Clearly, it's only natural you do that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in Birmingham we were riding high. It actually, I had a great 4 months, I think it was, I had there. We made the playoffs. We got beat off Blackpool in the semi-final of the playoffs, which was the year that Blackpool ended up getting promoted, beating Cardiff in the playoff final. So. Whilst I was disappointed that it didn't work out for me at Palace, it actually worked out for me great at Birmingham. I played every game I was there, and I got to experience the playoffs. And came into the summer, I was Dougie was saying there might be an opportunity. I just need to figure out my finances. And I think it was into the beginning of July, when everybody was going into to pre-season. I was still without a club, and Dougie called and just said, "Listen, can you come down? We're going to Cornwall for for a week, will you come and train? I need another centre half to kind of make the numbers up, which I didn't hesitate.
Fill you with confidence.
Yeah, it didn't. Do you know what it is, Ian? It was even if it was just to go down for that week, it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down. You know, we just brought Aaron Martin in from Southampton they just brought Aaron Martin in from Southampton on loan. There was Paddy. I think it was short of other options thereafter, and I got on well with Dougie, and still to this day, you know, we speak every now and then, and he was such a positive influence on me. You know, after that week, he just said, "I'm trying. You know, bear with me." And we went, I think it was to Portugal on tour. And by the time I came back from Portugal, there was, you know, Dougie had worked out the finances, and there was a year contract for me. So it was a no-brainer. By that time, because I'd been training and I'd been doing all right in the games, there's a couple of other clubs interested, but my heart was set on Palace, and mainly because what Dougie had done for me.
And were you and the family still based in and around London at that time?
No, we were. Well, yes, I still had my apartment in Sunningdale, but no, we were back up the road. I was in Newcastle. The family had just, you know, I had a young daughter on at that time. The one just seen at the start there, Evie, and another one on the way. My second was on the way, and they were based up there. But you know, when I signed for Palace, they moved down with me to, you know, we moved to Caterham, and again, you know, like we referenced the support network, I couldn't have done and signed for Palace if it wasn't for, you know, the support of my wife coming down and looking after us.
Good. She's not watching you saying this, is she?
No, she's not. So, okay, but she'll
probably
listen. There'll be somebody listening somewhere down. Yeah, there'll be somebody listening down the line, and she'll get reported back. Yeah, he said this about you. The cheeky so-and-so. But,
well, yeah. We'll put her straight. So you join the club, and then you become a goal scoring machine. You scored 4 goals.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Do you remember each of those?
Yep. First one was Leicester away. Second one, I think, was Middlesbrough at home. Third one was Leeds away, and then the fourth one was obviously the Watford. Yeah, I remember that. I scored 11 in my career, and I could probably tell each and every single one of them. But the ones at Palace,
no one can take them away from you, though.
Correct. You know, the one of my favourite goal was obviously the one at home against Borough, because I had my best mate from Berwick down. They were staying for me that weekend, and he stuck a bet on me to score, and I think I was something stupid like 30 or 40 to 1 or something like that, and he put a couple of quid on me, and we had he got an absolute fortune on winning. So we had a good night on him on the night after. And
against the team that you both your knees against.
And against the team I'd done my knees against, which was a little bit of revenge for me, but. You know, Muzza knocked it down for me. I've turned on the spin, and you know, even from 6 yards out, I managed to finish it. So it was a great moment to score. You know, at the Holmesdale end. It's obviously they're well renowned throughout world football. Even people reference them over here. You know, that the passion. That's in particular. You know, that the fanatics down at that bottom left hand corner as you look at the stand there.
How much do they actually feed into the energy of the team on the pitch when they're down? The fans in general at Palace? In general,
yeah. No, they really do. And I'm not just saying this just because for whatever, but they really do. It's why, you know, people like Arsene Wenger say they don't like coming to Selhurst. It's why people like Jose Mourinho dread coming to Selhurst, because they do. They really do. And again, I'm not just saying that. You're getting, you know, some of the world's best managers saying that it's a hotbed of an atmosphere to come into, and when they really do get going, even when the times are tough, they're still behind supporting the team, and they do give you that little extra burst of energy when maybe you're on your knees. They do kind of get you going again, and when you're winning and they're singing, there's, you know, for me, that's outside of St James's and the Gallagher end, there's not many other stadiums.
Listen, I'm not going to ask you to put us a top. I wouldn't even dream of it, and I certainly wouldn't put you in that position, even though you told me that beforehand. So, talking of world famous managers, what was Ollie like to play for?
Yeah, Ollie. It was certainly different to Dougie. He was
It's
Dougie
sublime
was
to
it
the
was
ridiculous, isn't it?
yeah, it really was. But I mean, Ollie was obviously he had a brand of football that was totally different to what Dougie had us playing. Dougie had a group of players that was hard working, honest pros who, you know, many of us weren't wanted. You know, I told you about my situation. Damo wasn't wanted at at Ipswich, sorry. So, you know, came along the road to Palace. You know, there was young players who were kind of, Dougie was moulding, you know, the Wilfs, Johnny Williams. You know, he brought Yala Balassi in from Plymouth.
I
Nobody even
know,
heard of Yala.
for a ridiculous fee.
Yeah, not from Plymouth, from Birmingham, Bristol City.
Bristol City,
Bristol
wasn't it?
City,
Yeah.
yeah. Nobody had ever heard of Yala before he came to Palace. You know, Glenn left kind of Brighton. I hadn't even heard of Glenn Murray prior to coming to Palace. So he just managed to, you know, Joel Ward from Portsmouth.
Portsmouth,
You know,
yeah.
Johnny Parr from somewhere in Norway.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it.
Exactly. But this is the thing. Dougie kind of brought together a group of players that were, you know, kind of odds and ends. And he just molded us into this kind of robotic machine. And when Ollie walked through the door, he tried to dismantle it with this free-flowing football, which, you know, none of us were able to play. But Ollie, I think, realised that, and to his internal credit, he recognised that he had a group of players who could only play a certain way, but he had that sprinkling of stardust. He had the Yarlas, he had the Wilfs, he had the Johnny Williams. You know, he brought Stephen Dobbie in, who was, you know, such an underrated player.
Yeah.
Such an underrated player who could give us that kind of flair. You know, Andre Moritz.
He was a bit mercurial, was Moritz, wasn't he?
Correct, he was, but he fitted our style, and Ollie allowed them players to try things, be the mercurial talents that they are, because they had the old heads of me, Damo.
Exactly, he had the foundations that ironically Dougie forged, and you know, and most teams with flair, they have the solid foundations from which to have that talent, don't they?
Yeah, and whilst Dougie allowed, you know, these players to go, they had to do it within the structure where Ollie was just go and play, just unleash the shackles, and allowed them. And, you know, obviously there was games where they frustrated the life out of us because we were doing more defending than we'd like to do. But Ollie found a way, and to his internal credit, you know, found a system and style that, you know, mirrored both philosophies, and obviously was successful in us getting promoted.
I guess the key, because I'm a centre half as well, so I could probably understand a key to having teams like that is having a central midfielder who understands when to drop back and sit in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, Wilf got all the plaudits, and quite rightly so, for winning games almost on his own. And some, I remember going to Peterborough away, and Wilf terrorising Peterborough. You know, he scored goals, he was setting up goals, but he could only do that without, for me, the best player in the league at that time was Mile. I mean, he was the heartbeat of that team.
He was a monster.
He was more than that. He was just, I mean, he ran the club in the way that everybody, if Mile started talking, you shut up and you listen. You know, everything was centered around Mile. You know, he took on the captain's armband from Paddy, who unfortunately got the long-term injury.
Yeah.
But between the two of them, they ran the dressing room. You know, Ollie was just let everybody do what he wanted, but the boys listened to Ollie and respected him. And I'm not for 1 minute saying that, you know, they didn't disrespect him anyway. But Mile and Paddy ran that dressing room, and then when Mile was on the pitch, he was a monster. And everything that was these players that were allowed to do was allowed to do because he was there.
And also, players like that only command that sort of respect when they walk the walk as well.
Correct.
They don't just talk a good game; they actually deliver and lead by example.
Correct. And, you know, I like to, and I've joked about to Mile, my demise at Palace was because of him, because he picked up 10 bookings. He was suspended for Ipswich away when I had a stinker. And I was dropped after that game, and it was only because Mile was suspended, and I didn't have my rock in front of me to keep me in check. And I didn't play into the remaining games in the playoffs, and I like to blame. We have a laugh, tongue in cheek about that. Blame me.
Oh, well, I'm glad you can laugh about it, because I mean that's one of the questions. Is obviously that season, talking about the promotion season, the playoff season, you had 40 league appearances, and yet you didn't get to play in the playoff part.
Yeah, and that was that's the biggest heartache for me in my career, is that I felt that I'd done enough throughout the course of the season to allow one bad game.